My child, you were meant to find this today. I want to say that plainly before anything else, because I do not want you to treat this as simply one more thing passing through your attention on an ordinary day. Something quieter than chance brought you here at this exact moment, and I want you to trust that rather than dismiss it as nothing. I know how easy it would be to keep scrolling, to let this pass by the way. So many things already have today. But I am asking you to stay a little longer, because what I want to say to you deserves more than a passing glance. I want to speak honestly about what you have been carrying, because I do not think you have let many people see the full size of it. You have smiled through days when something heavier sat underneath. You have shown up for responsibilities while feeling genuinely depleted. You have carried concerns too complicated to explain in a single sentence, and you have done most of it quietly without complaint, because you did not want to become a burden to the people around you. I want you to know that none of that has gone unnoticed. You have not been distant from the eyes that matter, even in your hardest, most tired moments. Difficulty has a way of stripping away everything except the most honest parts of a person, and honesty, even when unpolished and full of doubt, is worth paying attention to. I want to talk about why today specifically matters, because I do not want you assuming that every message like this one is simply generic encouragement without any real relevance to your particular life. There is a reason your attention slowed down here rather than somewhere else. Something in your life right now is standing at a genuine point of decision, or a genuine point of transition, even if it does not feel dramatic from where you are currently standing. I want you to consider that some of the most significant turning points in a life do not arrive as emergencies. They arrive as ordinary moments, very much like this one, when a person simply decides quietly to finally pay attention to something they have been avoiding, or to finally receive some encouragement they have needed for a long time, but had stopped expecting to actually hear. I want to speak honestly about the specific thing many people carry without ever naming it clearly, the sense that they are handling life reasonably well on the surface while quietly aware that something underneath needs real attention. Maybe it is a conversation you have been avoiding because you already suspect how it will go. Maybe it is a habit you keep returning to that you already know does not actually help. Maybe it is simply a persistent sense that you have drifted slightly from the person you actually want to be, without any single dramatic moment marking when that drift began. Whatever it specifically is for you, noticing it honestly right now, even briefly, matters more than you might currently realize. Not because ignoring it one more day would be catastrophic, but because these things tend to compound quietly. A small drift left unaddressed becomes a slightly larger drift the next day, and eventually enough of those unaddressed days accumulate into a distance that feels much harder to close than it would have been to address honestly at the beginning. I want to talk now about what has actually been happening beneath the surface of your life during this long, difficult stretch, because I think you deserve to understand it more clearly rather than simply being told to keep waiting without explanation. You have developed a deeper capacity for patience than you likely had before this season began. You have developed a clearer sense of what actually matters to you, refined through wanting something and not receiving it immediately. You have developed resilience specifically through continuing to function even when circumstances offered very little visible encouragement to do so. I want you to understand that these developments are not separate from whatever comes next in your life. They are the actual foundation that makes receiving and sustaining something genuinely good possible. The version of you standing here right now, shaped by genuine difficulty, is considerably more prepared to receive something significant than you may currently give yourself credit for. I want to talk about the specific opposition that tends to increase right before something meaningful shifts, because I do not want you to mistake resistance for proof that nothing good is coming. Sometimes discouragement grows louder specifically because you are closer to a breakthrough than you realize, and whatever has been working against your progress is making one final push before losing its grip entirely. I am not telling you this so you treat every hard day as evidence of some grand spiritual battle. Ordinary life is genuinely difficult sometimes, in simple human ways that do not require a dramatic explanation. But I want you to hold this possibility gently, so that if resistance does show up during a season of real change, you do not automatically assume it proves nothing is happening. I want to speak now about why you specifically needed to hear this today, rather than at some other point in your life. I suspect there is something particular weighing on you right now, something that has been building quietly for a while, that has reached a point where it genuinely needed acknowledgement. I want you to trust that instinct rather than dismiss it. You are allowed to take this message seriously, even if you cannot fully articulate why it feels significant. I want to talk now about what specifically might begin shifting once you actually receive this message, rather than letting it pass by unexamined. You may notice gradually a growing sense of clarity about decisions that previously felt confusing or overwhelming. You may notice conversations landing differently than similar conversations have landed before. You may notice opportunities appearing that specifically require the kind of resilience and patience you have already developed through this difficult season. I want you to pay attention to these shifts as they begin appearing, not with anxious scrutiny that examines every small development for proof that everything has changed, but with a kind of quiet readiness that simply notices and receives what arrives without demanding it conform to a specific dramatic shape. I want to speak about comparison for a moment, because I suspect you have occasionally wondered why other people's circumstances seem to resolve more quickly or more visibly than your own, despite your consistent effort to maintain hope through genuine difficulty. Other people's timelines are not a measure of the value or the eventual outcome of your own sustained hope. What has been quietly building in you does not need to match anyone else's visible progress in order to eventually matter in your own life. In your own time, in a way specifically suited to what you have actually developed through this particular stretch of waiting. I want to speak honestly about the specific loneliness that can accompany maintaining hope when the people around you do not fully understand or share that same commitment to trust through difficulty. There is a particular kind of isolation in continuing to believe when others around you have already moved on to resignation or cynicism about similar circumstances in their own lives. That loneliness is real, and it does not need to be minimized. But this particular season of sustained, sometimes solitary hope is building something in you that will eventually connect you with other people who share that same capacity. I want to talk now about forgiveness, because I suspect it connects to at least part of what has been unsettled in you lately. Forgiveness does not mean pretending something did not hurt you, and it does not mean allowing someone back into your life who has shown no real change or accountability. It simply means loosening the grip that a past wound has over your present peace. You are able to release someone from your resentment without necessarily releasing them back into your daily life. Those are genuinely two separate decisions, and you are allowed to make one without automatically making the other. If there is a specific situation you have been quietly holding on to, even a low simmering resentment you rarely mention out loud, consider setting down a portion of that weight today. Not because the original situation was fair, but because that resentment has likely been costing you more over time than it has been costing anyone else. I want to speak about the version of yourself that existed before certain hard seasons changed you, because I suspect there are days you quietly miss that earlier version, the one who trusted more easily, who worried less about being hurt again, who had not yet learned to brace for disappointment before it even arrived. You are not required to return to exactly who you were before, as though everything you have lived through since then was simply damage that needs undoing. Some of what you have become through hardship is genuinely more solid than what existed before it, even if it does not always feel that way in quieter, more vulnerable moments. I want to address the fear of hoping again after being disappointed too many times, because that fear makes complete sense given everything you have walked through. Hope that has been crushed repeatedly starts to feel dangerous, almost reckless. But protecting yourself from hope entirely does not actually protect you from anything real. A life lived without any hope at all is not actually safer. It is simply smaller. I am not asking you to hope recklessly, ignoring genuine warning signs or real patterns from your past. I am asking you to leave a small amount of room for the possibility that not everything you hope for is destined to be disappointed, the way some of your past hopes were. Some of what you are hoping for now is genuinely going to arrive, and I would rather you notice it clearly when it does than have trained yourself so thoroughly against hope that you cannot recognize a real answer, even standing directly in front of you. I want to speak now about what it means to actually trust a process you cannot fully see the end of yet. Trust like that is difficult, especially for someone who has learned through hard experience that things do not always work out the way they were hoped to. I am not asking for blind trust that ignores reality or refuses to acknowledge genuine difficulty. I am asking for a steadier kind of trust, one that can hold both truths at once, that things are genuinely hard right now, and that something meaningful is still unfolding underneath the difficulty, even before it becomes fully visible. I want to talk about patience for a moment, not as passive waiting, but as an active, ongoing choice to keep paying honest attention even when clarity is not immediately available. Real patience involves continued honest attention alongside continued waiting, and it deserves genuine respect rather than being dismissed as simply doing nothing while time passes. I want to speak about identity for a moment, because I think a great deal of what has weighed on you connects back to quiet uncertainty about who you actually are. Underneath your circumstances, your responsibilities, your daily routine circumstances shift constantly, but the core of who you actually are has remained steady beneath all of it, even during the seasons that felt most exhausting. I want to speak about community as well, because I think isolation has likely made this season feel heavier than it needed to feel. Even a small amount of genuine connection, a single honest conversation, can meaningfully lighten a burden that feels unbearable when carried entirely alone. If you have been isolating yourself, consider reaching toward at least one person you trust in the coming days. I want to talk now about gratitude, not as an obligation, but as something genuinely useful moving forward. Gratitude tends to widen a person's capacity to notice good things as they actually arrive, rather than remaining so fixated on what has not yet happened that the things which have already begun shifting go unnoticed. I want to invite you to notice honestly whatever small good things are actually present in your life right now, even amid everything that remains difficult. I want to speak plainly about self-compassion as well, because I suspect you have been considerably harder on yourself throughout this long season than you would ever be towards someone else demonstrating the exact same sustained hope under the exact same pressure. If someone else had walked through everything you have walked through, you would likely admire them without hesitation. I want you to consider extending that same admiration toward yourself, rather than continuing to minimize what your own sustained hope has actually required and accomplished. I want to talk about rest now, because I think you have likely postponed it more than you should have, believing that maintaining hope meant never fully acknowledging how tired the process of sustaining it has actually made you. Rest is not a betrayal of the hope you have built. It is what allows that hope to continue sustainably, rather than eventually collapsing under its own accumulated weight. I want you to give yourself permission to actually rest, not as a reward you have to earn through more sustained belief, but simply as a necessary part of continuing to be who you have already shown yourself capable of being. I want to speak now about the specific reason this message needed to reach you today rather than some other day, because I do not want this to remain only a vague, general sense of timing. Sometimes a person reaches a point where they have been carrying something long enough that a small amount of acknowledgement received at the right moment can genuinely shift how they experience the rest of that particular stretch of difficulty. I believe you may be at exactly that point right now, not because everything is suddenly about to resolve dramatically, but because you have reached a point where receiving honest encouragement, rather than continuing to manage everything entirely alone, might genuinely matter. I want to talk about what it might mean to actually let this message in, rather than appreciating it briefly, and then returning immediately to the same patterns you were following before you read it. Letting a message in means allowing it to actually inform a specific choice in the coming days, rather than only providing temporary emotional comfort that fades once ordinary life resumes its usual pace. I want you to consider, honestly, what one small thing might change in how you approach today or tomorrow, specifically because of something you have read here. I want to speak now about what practical steps might genuinely help you carry this message forward, rather than letting it dissolve by tomorrow morning. First, consider identifying one specific area of your life that this message has brought into clearer focus, whether that is a relationship, a decision, a habit, or simply your own internal sense of worth. Second, consider taking one small concrete action related to that area within the next day or two, rather than leaving the insight entirely abstract. Third, consider returning to this message, or at least to the specific parts that resonated most, if you find yourself forgetting its impact as ordinary life resumes. I want to talk about the specific fear that even if you do all of this, nothing will actually change in a meaningful way. I want to address that fear honestly. I cannot promise you a specific guaranteed outcome for every situation you are currently facing. Life does not always resolve exactly the way we hope, on exactly the timeline we would prefer. But I can tell you that continuing to notice, continuing to pay honest attention, continuing to take small steps rather than remaining passive, genuinely does shift how a person experiences their circumstances over time, even when the circumstances themselves take longer to resolve than anyone would prefer. I want to speak now about what has actually been happening beneath the surface during this long season of difficulty, because I think you deserve real explanation rather than only comforting reassurance. Genuine difficulty, endured honestly over a long period of time, tends to build specific capacities in a person: patience, clarity, resilience, compassion, that a person without similar difficulty rarely develops in the same depth. I want you to consider that whatever you are currently building through this season, even without a clear sense of exactly what it is for, is genuinely valuable, independent of whether you can currently see its specific purpose. I want to talk about the specific relationships in your life that this season may have tested, sometimes revealing which connections were genuinely solid and which were more fragile than they initially appeared. Difficult seasons have a way of clarifying relationships in ways that easier seasons often do not. People who show up consistently during genuine difficulty reveal something true about the depth of their care. People who quietly disappear during hard seasons reveal something true as well, even if that truth is disappointing to accept. I want you to consider, honestly, which relationships in your life actually held steady through this difficulty, and which ones revealed themselves to be less durable than you had hoped. This is not an invitation to become bitter toward the people who disappointed you during a hard season. People have their own limitations, their own struggles, their own capacity that sometimes falls short of what we needed from them. And that shortfall does not always mean malice or indifference, but it is worth noticing honestly which relationships prove genuinely reliable, because those are likely the relationships worth investing more deeply in as you move forward. I want to speak now about the specific grief that can accompany realizing certain relationships were not as solid as you once believed. That grief is real, and I do not want to minimize it by rushing past it towards simple acceptance. It is genuinely painful to discover that someone you counted on was not actually as present as you needed them to be during real difficulty. I want you to let that grief exist honestly while also allowing it to eventually inform how you invest your relational energy going forward. I want to talk about the specific relationships that did hold steady, the people who genuinely showed up for you during this difficult season, even in small, quiet ways that may not have felt dramatic at the time. I want you to notice those people specifically and to consider expressing gratitude toward them directly. If you have not already done so, genuine support during real difficulty deserves acknowledgement, both because the person offering it deserves to know it mattered, and because naming that support helps you fully register its significance. I want to speak now about what it might mean to begin trusting again, after a difficult season has tested your capacity for trust, both trust in other people and trust in your own judgment about circumstances and decisions. Trust rebuilt slowly through small, low-stakes moments of openness, rather than one dramatic leap, tends to hold up considerably better than trust forced back into place all at once before it has had time to genuinely stabilize. I want to talk about hope specifically, because I suspect hope has felt considerably riskier to you throughout this season than it once did earlier in your life. Hope that has been disappointed repeatedly starts to feel dangerous, almost foolish, like deliberately setting yourself up for more pain. I understand why guarding against that feels safer than continuing to hope openly. But I want to gently challenge the idea that protecting yourself from hope entirely is actually protecting you from anything real. A life lived without any hope at all is not actually safer. It is simply smaller, and you were never meant to live small simply because certain seasons hurt you deeply. I am not asking you to hope recklessly, ignoring genuine patterns or real warning signs from your past experience. I am asking you to leave a small amount of room even now for the possibility that not everything you hope for is destined to be disappointed, the way some of your past hopes were. Some of what you are hoping for as this season begins to pass is genuinely going to arrive, and I would rather you notice it clearly when it does than have trained yourself so thoroughly against hope that you cannot recognize a real improvement, even standing directly in front of you. I want to speak now about patience as a practice, rather than simply a passive state, because I think it is often misunderstood as merely enduring without complaint. Real patience involves continued effort alongside continued waiting. It means still showing up, still trying, still taking small steps forward, even while the larger resolution of this season remains unclear. That kind of patience is far more demanding than passive waiting, and it deserves genuine respect rather than being dismissed as simply doing nothing while time passes. I want to talk about setbacks specifically, because I do not want to suggest that once this season genuinely begins to pass, everything moves forward smoothly without any further difficulty ever again. Setbacks are a normal part of almost every process of genuine recovery, not evidence that the recovery itself was never real to begin with. If you experience a setback in the coming weeks, even after genuinely believing something had shifted, resist the urge to interpret that setback as proof that nothing actually changed. Recovery from genuine difficulty is rarely a straight upward line. I want to speak about identity once more, because I think it deserves repeated emphasis, given how much difficult seasons can distort a person's sense of who they actually are. During genuine hardship, it is common to begin defining yourself primarily by the difficulty itself, to start thinking of yourself as simply someone who struggles, someone whose life is defined by whatever season currently surrounds them. I want you to gently resist that narrowing of identity. You are considerably more than this current season, even while you are genuinely in the middle of it. The season is something happening to you and around you. It is not the entirety of who you actually are. I want to speak honestly about the specific temptation to give up right before a season actually begins to clear, because that particular moment, right before change becomes visible, is often the hardest one to endure. It is the point where you have already invested so much patience and effort that continuing feels almost unbearable, while you still cannot see any concrete evidence that your effort is about to pay off. If you find yourself in that exact moment right now, I want you to know that the temptation to quit does not automatically mean you have misjudged your situation. It often simply means you are closer than the discouragement in front of you would suggest. I want to speak plainly about forgiveness now, both toward other people and toward yourself, because I suspect this season has left you carrying resentment in more than one direction. Forgiveness does not mean pretending something did not hurt you, and it does not mean allowing someone back into your life who has shown no real change or accountability. It simply means loosening the grip that a past wound has over your present peace. I also want you to consider forgiving yourself for whatever mistakes you may have made during this difficult season. Decisions you now see differently in hindsight. Moments you were less patient or less gracious than you wish you had been while under real pressure. You were doing your best with the resources you had available at the time. I want to talk about the version of yourself that existed before this particular season began, because I suspect there are moments you quietly miss that earlier version, the one who trusted more easily, who worried less about the possibility of further difficulty, who had not yet learned to brace so heavily against disappointment. You are not required to return to exactly who you were before, as though everything you have lived through since then was simply damage that needs undoing. Some of what you have become through this hardship is genuinely more solid than what existed before it, even if it does not always feel that way in quieter, more vulnerable moments. I want to speak now about what it means to actually trust a process you cannot fully see the end of yet. Trust like that is difficult, especially for someone who has learned through hard experience that things do not always work out the way they were hoped to. I am not asking for blind trust that ignores reality or refuses to acknowledge genuine difficulty. I am asking for a steadier kind of trust, one that can hold both truths at once, that things are genuinely hard right now, and that something meaningful is still unfolding underneath the difficulty, even before it becomes fully visible. I want to talk about the specific relief of finally being able to rest a little more fully as this season begins to pass, now that some of the pressure to constantly brace for further difficulty may begin easing slightly. I do not mean that you should abandon wisdom or become careless about genuine risks. I mean that the exhausting sense of needing to remain in a constant state of defensive vigilance can begin to soften as evidence accumulates that circumstances are genuinely improving. That softening is not permission to become reckless. It is simply permission to stop carrying quite so much defensive tension, trusting instead that you can respond to whatever comes next without needing to remain perpetually braced for the worst. I want to speak about gratitude once more, because I think it deserves to be revisited rather than mentioned only briefly. Gratitude during a difficult season is not about pretending everything is fine when it is not. It is about noticing, honestly, whatever small good things genuinely exist alongside the difficulty, rather than allowing the difficulty to completely eclipse everything else in your field of vision. This kind of gratitude does not deny the reality of the season. It simply refuses to let the season become the only thing you are capable of seeing. I want to talk now about what legacy might mean in the context of this particular season, because I think you have likely underestimated how the way you have handled this difficulty might be influencing people around you, even without your direct awareness of it. When you choose to keep functioning through genuine hardship, when you choose patience over bitterness, when you choose to remain fundamentally kind even while exhausted, that choice does not only affect you, it quietly shapes the people watching you. Sometimes people you are not even thinking about in the moment you make that choice. I want you to carry that knowledge gently, not as additional pressure to perform resilience flawlessly at all times, but as a quiet reminder that your endurance through this season has value extending well beyond your own personal experience of it. I want to close this reflection with one final, honest thought before moving towards some practical closing guidance. Everything shared here rests on a truth that was true long before this message reached you and will remain true long after you finish reading it. You are someone who has continued functioning through genuine difficulty repeatedly, across a stretch of time that has genuinely tested you. That perseverance sustained through real hardship has built something valuable in you, something that was never actually dependent on the season ending quickly in order to matter. I want to leave you with a few simple, practical things worth holding on to in the days ahead, because insight alone rarely sustains a person through an ordinary difficult afternoon, when the weight of this season resurfaces unexpectedly. Notice the small signs of change rather than only watching for something dramatic and undeniable. A conversation that goes better than expected, a moment of unexpected calm, a quiet sense of internal steadiness about a situation that once felt completely overwhelming. These are not insignificant. They are often the earliest signs of a season genuinely beginning to pass. Give yourself permission to rest without guilt, recognizing that enduring real difficulty is genuinely demanding work deserving of real recovery. Be patient with how gradually resolution tends to unfold, understanding that lasting relief is rarely built or received all at once. Keep speaking honestly, both to yourself privately and where it feels safe to do so, to people who genuinely understand and value what you have carried through this season. And finally, keep returning to this quiet, steady truth for as long as you need it. What you have endured through this season was never wasted, even during the stretches it felt that way. It mattered then, and it continues to matter now, as whatever comes next gently begins to unfold around what you have already, quietly, consistently survived. Take a breath. Let your shoulders drop just slightly from wherever they have been holding tension without you fully noticing it. You have already demonstrated repeatedly exactly the kind of endurance that difficult seasons require. That track record means something real. Carry it with you gently into whatever comes next, trusting that the relief you have quietly waited for is finally beginning to catch up to the perseverance you have already faithfully maintained. I want to speak a little more about what this quieter shift might actually feel like as the season continues passing, because I think it is easy to imagine relief as something loud and dramatic, when in reality it often arrives in far smaller, steadier forms. It might look like a decision that once felt impossible suddenly becoming clear. It might look like a relationship you had quietly worried about beginning to settle into something more stable. It might look like nothing more dramatic than a growing sense of internal steadiness, a quiet knowing that whatever comes next, you have already proven capable of facing it with genuine resilience rather than complete despair. I want you to hold space for all of these possibilities rather than narrowing your expectation down to only one specific form relief must take in order to count. Sometimes the most meaningful resolution is the quiet kind, the kind that settles into your own sense of security rather than arriving as a dramatic external event. I want to talk now about what it means to keep growing even after this season passes, because I do not want you to mistake the passing of this season as a finish line rather than a continuing process. Growth is not something achieved once and then permanently secured. It continues to require the same quiet, consistent choices that built it in the first place. Patience chosen again tomorrow, Kindness extended again in the next difficult moment. I want to speak plainly about the fear that once this relief arrives, you might somehow lose it through a single difficult moment or a single setback that tests your resilience again. I want to address that fear directly. Genuine resilience built through repeated difficult moments over a long period of time is not erased by a single moment of renewed struggle. You are allowed to have difficult moments even within this season of relief. What matters is the overall pattern you have established, not flawless, unwavering strength in every single moment going forward. I want to close this reflection with one final, honest thought. Everything shared here rests on a truth that was true long before this message reached you, and will remain true long after today ends. You are someone who has consistently continued functioning through genuine difficulty when giving up would have been fully understandable. That endurance, sustained across a genuinely difficult season, has built something real in you, something that was never actually dependent on the season's timeline in order to matter. Carry that truth gently into whatever comes next. You do not need to force relief to arrive faster than it naturally will. You simply need to continue being who you have already consistently, faithfully shown yourself to be, trusting that whatever is already beginning to unfold will continue to reveal itself clearly, in its own time, exactly as it has already begun to do. Wherever you are reading this, whatever room, whatever moment of your day this happens to be, let it settle into you fully before you move on to whatever comes next. You are not required to feel completely different immediately. You are simply invited to remain a little more aware of what you have already built through sustained endurance, trusting that whatever is unfolding will continue to reveal itself patiently, one honest day at a time, starting from right now. I want to speak a little more before I let this close, because I think there is real value in staying here a bit longer, rather than rushing toward the end. I want to talk about the specific weight of carrying something quietly for a long time without anyone around you fully understanding its size. There is a particular kind of loneliness in that. One that has nothing to do with being physically alone, and everything to do with feeling unseen, even while surrounded by people who genuinely care about you. You have likely smiled through conversations while carrying something heavier underneath, not out of dishonesty, but because explaining the full depth of it felt exhausting, or because you were not sure anyone would actually understand even if you tried. I want you to know that being misunderstood by people who love you does not mean you have been truly alone in what you carried. It simply means human understanding has limits, even within good and caring relationships. Every version of your story that never found the right words, every feeling too complicated to explain in a normal conversation, none of it went unnoticed. It was known fully, even in the moments you felt most invisible to everyone around you. I want to speak now about the small, quiet acts of resilience you have shown that likely went completely unrecognized by anyone else. The mornings you got up anyway, even when everything in you wanted to stay under the covers. The responsibilities you kept fulfilling even while feeling emotionally depleted. The kindness you continued extending to other people even during weeks when you had very little kindness left over for yourself. None of that was small. It takes real strength to keep functioning while carrying real weight, and that strength deserves acknowledgement, even if you have rarely given it to yourself. I want to talk honestly about anger as well, because I think some of what you have carried was not only grief or fear, but genuine anger, at situations that felt unfair, at people who let you down, at a version of your life that did not unfold the way you once expected it to. Anger is not automatically wrong or unfaithful. It is often simply evidence that something mattered deeply to you, that a real hope was genuinely disappointed. I am not asking you to suppress that anger or pretend it does not exist. I am asking you to let it exist honestly without letting it become the permanent lens through which you view everything ahead of you. I want to talk about the version of yourself that existed before certain hard seasons changed you, because I know there are days you quietly miss that earlier version, the one who trusted more easily, who laughed more freely, who had not yet learned to brace for disappointment before it arrived. I want to offer you a different way of thinking about that earlier self. You are not required to return to exactly who you were before, as though everything you have lived through since then was simply damage to undo. Some of what you have become through hardship is actually more solid than what existed before it, even if it does not always feel that way. I want to speak now about what it means to actually trust a process you cannot fully see the end of yet once more, because it deserves repeated emphasis rather than being said only once and left behind. Trust like that is built slowly, through small moments of choosing to keep going, even without complete certainty, rather than through one dramatic decision made once and never revisited again. Every time you choose to keep showing up despite uncertainty, that trust becomes a little sturdier, a little more able to hold you steady the next time doubt returns, as it likely will at some point along the way. I want to talk about patience once more as well, not as passive waiting, but as an active, ongoing choice to keep moving forward even when results are not immediately visible. Patience is often misunderstood as simply enduring without complaint, but real patience involves continued effort alongside continued waiting. It means still showing up, still trying, still taking small steps forward, even while the larger outcome remains unclear. I want to speak honestly about setbacks once more, because I do not want to suggest that once real change begins, everything moves forward smoothly without any further difficulty. Setbacks are a normal part of almost every meaningful process of growth, not evidence that the growth itself was never real to begin with. If you experience a setback during this season, even after genuinely believing something had shifted, resist the urge to interpret that setback as proof that nothing actually changed. Growth is rarely a straight upward line. I want to talk about identity once more, because I think a great deal of what has weighed on you connects back to quiet uncertainty about who you actually are. Underneath your circumstances, your job, your relationships, your daily responsibilities, it is easy to let external circumstances define your sense of self, especially during long seasons of struggle, when it can feel like your entire identity has narrowed down to simply surviving whatever is currently in front of you. Circumstances shift constantly, but the core of who you actually are has remained steady underneath all of it, even during the seasons that felt most destabilizing. I want to speak about community once more as well, because I think isolation has likely made everything feel heavier than it needed to feel. Even a small amount of genuine connection, a single honest conversation, a single relationship where you do not have to perform constant strength, can meaningfully lighten a burden that feels unbearable when carried entirely alone. If you have been isolating yourself even unintentionally during this difficult season, consider reaching toward at least one person you trust, even in a small way. I want to close this extended reflection by speaking directly, one final time, to whatever specific fear or doubt is loudest in you right now, in this exact moment as you finish reading. Whatever that particular fear is, it does not have final authority over what actually happens next in your life. Fear is loud, and it often feels urgent and convincing, but it is not always accurate, and it is not always predictive of what will genuinely unfold. You are allowed to feel that fear honestly while still choosing to take the next step forward despite it. So take one more slow breath before you close this message and move forward into whatever comes next in your day. You have carried enough for long enough. Something lighter is genuinely allowed to begin now, even quietly, even gradually, even before you can fully explain everything that has shifted inside you. Something has changed, and you are allowed to let yourself believe that, one honest step at a time, for as long as it takes to feel solid beneath your feet again. There is one final thread I want to leave with you, because I think it ties everything else together in a way that might make the whole message easier to carry once you step away from it. Everything shared here rests on one simple assumption: that you are worth this much attention, this much care, this much patience extended toward your own preparation and growth. You are not required to prove your worth through performance in order to deserve rest or good things arriving in your life. Worth is not a reward given out for flawless behavior. It exists underneath performance entirely, present even during your least productive, least impressive seasons. I want to leave you with a simple, honest picture to hold on to in the days ahead. Picture yourself a year from now, looking back at this exact day, remembering that you found this message and actually let it settle in rather than scrolling past it. Imagine that future version of yourself being able to say, honestly, that something did shift after this. Not necessarily instantly, not necessarily dramatically, but genuinely, over time, through a series of small, deliberate choices that gradually built into something solid. That future is not guaranteed simply by reading these words once and moving on immediately. It requires continued, ordinary effort from you day after day, in ways that will rarely feel significant in the moment they happen. But it is genuinely available to you, starting from wherever you currently stand, regardless of how far behind or how stuck you might feel right now. Remember one final time that you have already survived every difficult day up to this exact point in your life, without a single exception. That fact alone deserves more credit than you likely give it in your quieter, more discouraged moments. Whatever specific difficulty you are currently facing, you already have direct evidence built from your own lived experience that you are capable of enduring hard things and eventually finding your way through them, even when you cannot yet see exactly how that will happen this time. Carry that evidence with you gently as you move forward from this moment, not as pressure to perform resilience perfectly, but as a quiet, steady reminder available to you whenever doubt returns. You have already built something real. Whatever comes next simply continues to reveal what was already true about you long before circumstances began confirming it more visibly. Let this be the moment you choose to continue being exactly who you have already consistently chosen to be, gently, honestly, one small step at a time, trusting that the next step will become visible once you have actually taken this one. That has always been enough to keep moving forward, even during your hardest seasons, and it remains enough today as well. Wherever you are reading this, whatever room, whatever moment of your day this happens to be, let it settle into you fully before you move on to whatever comes next. You were meant to find this today, not because of some elaborate design you need to fully understand, but simply because you needed it, and it arrived. Let that be enough. Carry it with you gently, one honest day at a time, starting from right now.